All right. Thank you very much, Nasima. It's very
Welcome.
wonderful to be here. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And I'm just going to switch to my screen. And I hope everybody can see. So just to let you know, I mean, we're recording the session, so it'll be available in video, and I'll share my slides afterwards so everyone can see. To introduce myself a little, I work for a company called Visible. What we do is we go into companies and look at how they deliver software or any other major value added capabilities and help them map it out. So define and then improve those processes. I'm on Twitter quite a bit and LinkedIn, so you can find me there if you're looking for more information. And I'll share some links at the end, not only with the slides, but for more detail. So I'm going to start the agenda with a little bit of context, setting the stage, and then go into this idea of maps and compasses, which you may have heard before, but it's something I find very valuable to allow us to bucket things and think of concepts and techniques in the right context and combine them together to get the most value. And then I'll dig into a little bit more about value streams, what they are, what they look like, how they can be valuable. I'll go through an example of mapping a value stream and what kind of value we get from mapping. And then I'll introduce capability mapping as a concept that can augment and really improve the value of a value stream map. So with that, Nasima gave me a great introduction. I've got kind of a broad background. I really started out in building and fixing computers, solving Windows problems. I've started in tech support actually at IBM a very, very long time ago. But I've always really been focused on process and improving flow. So that's kind of brought me from my starting point to what I'm focused on now. And to go back a little bit to 2014, this is kind of what I was obsessed with at the time, was the idea of pipelines and looking at automation and looking at software delivery from a start to finish perspective. And this is where a lot of the industry is and definitely was in 2014. This was something that didn't exist back then. DevOps was very new. People were really just starting to think in terms of start to finish. And nowadays, my start to finish is actually broadened quite a bit. And I think as we go further down the road with things like DevOps, we're thinking more end to end. We're definitely thinking more from a concept to cash perspective. So where do we get an idea and then deliver that to customers and have positive outcomes rather than just running through processes. So that's brought me to 2018 where I really started focusing on value streams. And that's because my last job as CTO in StatFlow, we hit a bunch of bottlenecks that were impacting flow and impacting our ability to scale and service our customers and really maintain and improve our velocity. And so this concept of the value stream, which I actually learned from business school, started to become very valuable as a concept to follow rather than focusing on pipelines and focusing on technical details. Looking at things in terms of a value stream really brought it to encompass the people side, everything manual going on, because if we focus entirely on automation, we're really missing all the things that aren't working really well. And I find that as an industry, we focus a lot on the tech or we focus a lot on the people, but the value stream is really where they come together. And this is kind of a trend that's been growing in the industry. So nationwide in 2018, they were looking at why they were so slow, why it was so challenging for them to adopt agile transformation and digital transformation and modernize their processes. And this 2.5% is actually the amount of developer productivity that they were seeing. So developers were spending 2.5% of their time on actually producing value. And that was kind of shocking. But it's also shocking that the industry average is about 15%. So developers spend about 15% on average actually building code, creating value for the business. And the rest of that time is going to meetings, it's looking through documentation, trying to figure things out, scheduling, trying to make decisions, trying to get everybody on the same page. And by looking at things in terms of a value stream and start to finish, what is the full process, what's everything involved, they started to see this shift. And it brought them from being 3 years to releasing code to 3 months. And it was such a dramatic difference that's one of the things where I see, if a company as large as Nationwide is getting these results from this shift in focus, I'm seeing examples like that all over the place. And it's really a dramatic change from focusing entirely on Scrum or Agile or whatever your iteration pattern is, to looking at things in terms of a value stream. And it's kind of zooming out and adopting a broader perspective that makes a big difference. So kind of the main qualities of this practice that I don't see addressed in many other places with many other techniques is this idea of being able to figure out where we are, and it's mapping our current state. And that's something that we don't do very often. We don't really have great patterns and practices to do it, but it's incredibly valuable when we can figure out what are we actually dealing with? What is our biggest problem right now? What are we doing on a regular basis? We don't often look at how we're doing the work. We're focused so much on doing the work. And we can get a lot of value by focusing on what makes the work work. And from that point, we can focus on where should we go from here. So once we know where we are, we can make informed decisions about what should we be focusing on, what should we be automating, what should we be investing in, and then we can have conversations about how we should get there. So what are the specific top priority items? What is the most valuable thing to work on? Where are we going to see the return on investment? And this idea of compasses versus maps is valuable to me because as an industry, we spend a lot of time looking at compasses, which are things like other company examples. They're static reference points. I'm not sure how many people have heard of the DORA metrics, but any kind of industry benchmark and metrics are going to give us just a point of reference that we can maybe head towards, but it doesn't really give us any context about where we are. And I just realized that I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions or anything from Nasima we should address before I go into maps.
Harbin has a question.
Okay.
Hi, thank you, Nasima. So okay. Steve, can you, from your recent experience or recent assignment, can you correlate the value stream and how it was mapped? What was the key challenges that you highlighted in terms of the return ROI and how it was resolved? It will help us in correlating your journey.
Absolutely. So I get into a little bit more detail about a specific example further on, but as a reference, one of my most recent engagements was working with actually a smaller software team in a startup, and they were looking at why it was taking them so long to deliver code, right? So it was taking them multiple sprints to ship things to production. They were seeing a lot of time that wasn't represented in any of their systems. So they were looking at, okay, well, Jira says it only takes this long. from the time we have an idea to when our customers are actually using something seems to be this long, and there's a discrepancy. There's a big gap between what we can measure and what we're actually seeing in reality. And so by mapping the value stream, we were able to pull out everything that was happening. So we went step by step through the process of how they ship code, and we were able to highlight specific areas where if we were to invest and spend some time automating or improving the process, we would see massive improvements. And we could measure and forecast those improvements. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about how that comes together in a bit, but that's a great question.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And that's a pretty good point that you highlighted. So which means that a value stream actually enables the leadership to look at all the blocks from a holistic picture and which block is causing the bottleneck and how to fix the problem. Have I understood right from your example?
Exactly. And I'll show you exactly how how we get there.
Awesome, thank you.
Because I find that a lot of teams right now, they're starting to measure things. They're starting to look at their processes, but they're pulling it out of systems that are only showing them a tiny piece, right? They're either looking at Jenkins to see how their deployment process or their CI/CD is performing, or they're looking at Jira to get information about from when a ticket opens to when it closes. But there's a lot of stuff that's either on the edges of that or captured in between that doesn't appear for people. And so value stream mapping is a way of finding everything that's going on, which is incredibly valuable when you're trying to figure out where you should be focusing your time.
Thank you.
So you're very welcome. So to move on to maps, where I see maps, and if you've ever been in a scout program or if you've ever tried to navigate using just a map or just a compass, you'll know that you're only getting part of the value, and really combining them together is where you start to get confidence in, I know where I am, I know where I'm going, and I can chart a path to get there. And where we want to get to in terms of navigation and confidence is something like Waze or Google Maps, right? Where we're able to see exactly our next step. We're able to reroute. So a current situation where we have to change plans, how do we reroute ourselves around a new bottleneck, something that's blocking us currently that either wasn't visible before or is now a reality that we have to deal with. And that's really what makes things actionable and boosts confidence in the team. So if we start from this idea of looking at our current surroundings, this might seem familiar to some people. It's patterns that I see all over the place. I see a lot of really long meetings. I see a lot of handoffs where people are context switching and trying to figure out how they should be dealing with work from other people, how they should be collaborating. We see communication breakdowns. We see alignment breakdowns. We see people dealing with staff and capacity issues when people are sick or away or on vacation. We see approvals that are problematic and maybe a lot of stress from trying to deliver under tight deadlines or difficult circumstances. So what we want to do when we look at a value stream is to kind of avoid all of that by looking at where all of those things are happening and then alleviating those stress points and those bottlenecks. So this is starting from a very, very high level, and this might be kind of familiar to some people if they deal at the portfolio level, if they're familiar with the portfolio level of software development. But for everybody else, this is really just a high level where we start with to get our bearings and to figure out where we want to focus next. So we'll typically go from this to having a few hypotheses about where we should be examining and digging down and getting more detail. So if we're looking at a portfolio, we might say, well, we really want to focus on product development. And if we wanted to, we could measure and decide. But let's say we just have a hypothesis we want to dig down, and people are fairly certain that they know where the problem is or where they want to focus. So in this case, we'll say product development, and specifically inside of product development, it's execution. So kind of our build and development and deploy process. And then the team, they're often complaining about staging deployment and how difficult or time consuming that is, or frustrating. And so let's look at staging deployment and find out what's going on there. So this is kind of the idea of zooming in from a high level to really figure out where we should be focusing and where we want to really spend our time measuring. But it helps to start high and zoom in, because then everyone has context and everyone is on the same page. So we pick staging deployment and we dig further. We start to see all the steps that are involved in staging deployment. And from that point, we can start to look at actionable detail and really get high ROI information about what's actually happening in the value stream. I'm going to pause again because that was a lot, and give people a chance to ask a question, or Nasima, if you want to poll anybody or ask anything yourself, feel free.
We have a poll, a couple of questions. I will start to launch it now. Take your time and answer.
Oh, we get multiple questions. This is awesome.
Yes, we have a couple of multiple questions.
Nasima,
Yes,
about your question.
sure.
So are you talking about, like the first one here, company size you're working for? What should we assume that if we're working with a customer or a client, that would be the company we're working for?
I believe it should be client, because some consulting firm, we work for companies like big companies.
Right.
So that will be more meaningful if we do it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think focusing on customers is a great reference point.
I don't understand the question. More project focused or more product focused? What's the difference?
So that's about whether or not your organization is kind of forming groups and teams around specific deliverables, or let's say SOWs or initiatives, or if they're working on more continuous long life cycle products. So for instance, it's kind of the difference between throwing an event for a new version of software, which would be a project, more of a project focus, or the software itself that continually gets updated and lives, let's say, on the cloud, so it's constantly being updated. That would be more of a product focus.
Thank you. I get it now.
I'm gonna give a couple of more seconds to vote, complete the voting. 79% voted.
Can I raise a quick question regarding number 4?
Sure.
I think it's a trick question, because how often do you measure? The question is, how often do you measure the right things? Because many people have tons of metrics, but how relevant are they? I mean, we hear velocity, everybody is so stuck on velocity, but.
Yes, absolutely agree, Andre, and that's a fantastic point. I think that in reality, very few people are measuring the right things, but most people don't necessarily know what the right things are. And I think we're just at the beginning of a journey to sort of figure those things out and generally arrive at a common understanding of what valuable measurements are. That's another presentation that I think we should dig into.
I think that's a workshop.
Agreed. I'll get into it a little bit, actually. I get into some examples of valuable measurements later in the presentation.
almost 91% voted. So any other question from any of you before we end the poll?
This is
Okay, I
great.
have, right. Hi, Steve. Harbans here. I have a question about your previous slide, if I'm allowed to ask right now.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. So on the previous slide is pretty interesting slide in terms of the execution model from, okay, I think the one more previous than that.
Yes.
Yes, so it defines the channel of communication from top management till the ground level of execution. Now, in terms of the quarterly updates and the product execution aspect, do you believe that story mapping will be to and fro between second and third?
It depends on the organization, of course. So this is just a specific example of one large, actually a very large client of mine. They were over 80,000 people. They were running SAFE as a sort of like a loose, safe environment.
Okay.
So they were very much starting from portfolio, very much still kind of a top-down PMO environment, and a lot of upfront planning. So they were doing a lot of work on story definition before they got to the execution phase. Also a very, very long release cycle. So we were trying to bring them from a four-year release cycle down to 3 months.
Oh, 3 months of cycle then. Oh. So were you able to achieve that?
We're still walking the path, but we're on track to do it.
Okay.
So I actually mapped out a future state value stream that's under 3 months. Yeah.
Okay. And in this the second layer, do you advise to have a upfront solution design and long-term planning, or the planning and solution design was also broken with the quarterly goals?
Oh, I think that, depending on each specific environment, I mean, another value of this, looking at things in terms of the value stream, is that each value stream is unique to not only the organization, but the team that is running that value stream. So this is a specific example. It's not a reflection of what I would advise.
Okay.
But this is more of a current state representation of a real life example.
All right. Okay. Nice.
This is very intensive, but in large organizations, you will have varying levels of detail and work involved. So I just figure it's a good example to show a rather complex example, because I think a lot of people will look at techniques like value stream mapping and think that it's only usable by a team or only usable in smaller organizations, but it really works at any level.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I have a question as well. So my question is, like, how do often you keep the customer engagement or stakeholder engagement throughout the value stream mapping? Like, what is the frequency of their communication?
That's a great question. So we start out with fairly intensive interaction. So it's typically 3 days of half-day efforts to define a current state and a future state and synthesize all the results. And then we go into sort of a coaching model where every week or 2 weeks, we have a check-in to find out what the bottlenecks are, whether things are moving forward, whether there's things that I can help with. And that kind of loosens up a bit. So the total end-to-end time frame is usually about 3 months for a value stream to map the current state, synthesize all the data, plan a future state, and then iterate towards the future state. And then hopefully you've reached the future state at the end of that 3 months, and you can do another one. And you kind of iterate through every 3 months to keep moving ahead.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for
Good
voting,
question.
everyone. I'm gonna share the result now. And You can see the result?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. So we're seeing most people from organizations under 100 people, most people concerned with planning for the future and improving performance, which I think is very timely. More product focused, which is great to see. And regularly measuring delivery performance. And to Andre's point, maybe not correctly, but starting is a great point. And then following frameworks sometimes. I think that's that makes sense to be fairly common. This is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. So, Steve.
I'm going to pick up. So if you recall, we're looking at staging deployment as a specific value stream. So in terms of setting resolution here and picking a value stream and picking the starting and ending points, that's all very arbitrary. We can pick whatever we like, wherever we think we're going to get value. So in this case, for staging deployment, we're looking at, this is a very micro view of a macro environment. But it can really help because it focuses attention. It means that we're getting people involved who are very specifically involved in this and concerned with this. So that can keep it very efficient and effective. And then we can zoom out once we've sort of solved the problem or once we have a plan for solving the problem. But I keep small just for illustration purposes. A typical value stream is somewhere between 15 and 20 steps. But for simplicity's sake, this is a more simplified example. So we're looking at the first thing we do, we walk through every step, and then we apply the measurement. So what you're seeing above every step is the time it takes to perform each step, and below, and you'll see that it's only present between some steps, that's the wait time. So it's something like a staging deployment. We're deploying software. There is a degree of automation. So some of these steps don't have any wait time. We just go from one to the next. But what we want to measure is the individual step time, because these could be pieces of the value stream that we could automate or improve specifically. And I've set an arbitrary level here where we're looking at anything over an hour is highlighted in red. That just helps us sort of find the hotspots and find out where we might get value by focusing further. And you'll see that there's a big difference. So we've highlighted environment creation and acceptance testing as two opportunities. These are two areas where we're taking up a lot of time. We might not be able to do anything about this, but at least we know where the time is going, and we can choose to focus on either of those. And if we're looking at the aggregate of this timing, we've got 11 hours and 20 hours. And what a lot of teams will make a judgment on what they want to focus on based on that timing. But there's a big improvement over what people typically focus on, because a lot of the time a team will come to me and they'll say, we want to automate deployment, right? They've already decided that they want to automate deployment, and it's based on maybe somebody else's benchmark, something they've seen in the industry, something they've decided is really important. And so it's really valuable in the context of a value stream to put this in context and say, okay, well, if we were to automate deployment, we'd be saving 15 minutes. And we can see that there's a very big difference between automating deployment and the ROI that we would get by focusing there, and whether we were focusing instead in where all this time is being eaten up. And this is a live example. This is a real life example from a previous client where they were about to spend millions and millions of dollars on automating deployment. And luckily they brought me in to do the value stream mapping, because we highlighted these other opportunities that are going to save them a ton more money and aren't going to require millions of dollars to be flushed down the drain to save a few minutes. So it can be really valuable when you're looking at where you're going to spend your time and where you're going to spend your money. But even between environment creation and acceptance testing, it can be easy to say, well, 20 hours is obviously more than 11 hours. But if we consider the fact that 60% of our smoke testing fails, and we have to go back to environment creation to configure variables or fix dependencies or some other issue, now all of a sudden in reality, what we're looking at is 22 hours versus 20 hours. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I'm going to pause for a second and take a drink of water, but if we have any questions, feel free to jump in.
So Steve, Dimitar here. Was there someone else?
Go ahead, Dimitar.
So this 60% fail, how do you represent this in a value stream map? So is it just this arrow, or is there any better way of actually communicating to the leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is commonly represented in value streams, traditional value streams, which come from manufacturing, as a percentage of complete and accurate. So you go through every step and you'll say, okay, well, artifact creation, what's the percentage of time that is complete and accurate? And that's really relevant when you're building, let's say, if we're manufacturing Coke bottles, then at every step, we want to make sure that, okay, we're 100% complete and accurate, or, a very high percentage when we're shaping the glass, and then maybe we're 60% complete and accurate when we're putting on labels. So that's an opportunity for us to improve the flow by focusing on where the complete and accurate is low. But that's a typical measurement for that. And I've left out that level of detail here just for illustration purposes, but that's something that we can layer on if we have quality issues, if we're concerned about rework, we can look at percent complete and accurate. And that's where you're going to get that number from.
Yeah, but in general, you wouldn't go through another 8 hours of waiting, or you might go through this 8 hours of waiting, because assuming that you already reached smoke testing, environment should be already there. That's
right. That's a very good point. So maybe we're looking more realistically at 14 hours versus 20 hours. And even so, if we're passing through again and we still have 60% complete and accurate, we might pass through another time before we make it all the way through, right? So that's a very good point. You're not incurring the entire penalty. Maybe it is a quick fix, but we also have to consider the context switching. We also have to consider being pulled out of whatever task we're performing. So there's costs there. This is a very soft measurement. It's not it's not entirely scientific, but it's meant to give us a more of an apples to apples comparison.
Got it. Thank you.
So
Wayne has a question, I guess.
Oh yeah. Go ahead,
my question was very similar to Dimitar's. I think you're showing a couple of different things on the map, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but the quality aspect is one thing. You've also got the timing on here, and I see below are wait times as opposed to active times on the top. So do you ever go into sort of a flow efficiency calculation where we're comparing active to wait?
Yes, and that's kind of a holistic measurement. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Once we map the value stream, that's one of the major metrics that we're getting out of it, is the percentage of time waiting compared to performing tasks. And even more valuable than that is to have a sub-measurement of how much value is actually created at each step. So let's say we have 30 minutes of performance testing, and only 10 minutes of that time is actually creating value because there's setup or configuration, or we're tearing things down and bringing them back up. And if we were to remove those from the step, we would be seeing a much higher number, a higher percentage of value creation.
Right.
Does that
right.
make sense? That's
Yeah.
a great point to highlight.
The only other thing that I've sometimes seen, I don't know how you'd work this in here, is for instance, in the Toyota production system, they were talking about the single-digit minute exchange of die, where they took one of their bottlenecks in the flow, and they really attacked that bottleneck and reduced that time. So not necessarily that long-running things are bad in your system. Sometimes you need long-running things, but do the long-running things waste time?
Right.
And can you recover that waste somehow? And I love value stream mapping for sort of illustrating or highlighting where the waste is in the system.
Yeah, we can definitely dig into a lot of different representations of what's happening, and it kind of depends on the situation. Whether we are in a highly efficient system, maybe we're looking at more quantifiable metrics. Maybe we're looking at automatic metric collection. So maybe we can get a lot of data from the system. And maybe we want to dig into detail in that case to get the maximum ROI. Or we've never looked at it before. And so just seeing it is incredibly valuable. And we don't really care so much about the detail because we're able to act and get a lot of value from just seeing it. So there's a spectrum of detail. We can also, one I really like seeing is who's involved at each step, because we have different people, we have different groups, we have different handoffs, and that can be very, very valuable to see. It's also valuable to see what tools are involved at each step, because there can be opportunities to consolidate tooling or integrate tooling. And once you see it, and once you see the whole end-to-end value stream, then all of a sudden you can make those decisions about, well, if we just pulled all this into the same system, we'd probably see a lot less friction or a lot less delay or bottlenecks. It's a great question. So what I often see with teams is, especially technical teams, especially in the age of DevOps, is that there's a lot of emphasis on pipeline. We're spending a lot of time looking at CI/CD, on automation. But what I find is that most of the time we're seeing problems at the edges of that. It's not usually the pipeline that's the biggest issue, because the pipeline is largely automated already. It's already in a system that tracks measurement data. It's already sending us alerts when things are failing or taking too long. So the opportunity for value there is fairly minimal compared to looking at the end-to-end value stream and looking at all the things at the edges of that. So upstream from the pipeline and downstream from the pipeline, where it's we get held up in approvals, or it takes us 2 weeks to schedule a meeting to agree on what to work on. These are massive wastes of time potentially. And the pipeline, what we might be looking at, okay, well, it takes 4 hours and we'd like to get it down to 10 minutes, but that is a massive difference between weeks and days to looking at hours. So the value of looking at things in terms of the value stream can really bring in the most valuable opportunity for automation and improvement. And so to break down the pieces again in the abstract, for just a recap for everyone, what we're looking at is primarily steps and measurement. And the key pieces of measurement are the time and the wait time. But we're capturing, so this thing that looks like a shrimp, that is manual steps, right? So oftentimes what we're looking at is everything that's automated, but the biggest opportunities can be not only our manual activities, the things that we're doing by hand or the things that humans are doing, but also the wait time. And that's not always captured in our tooling and automation. So if we step through another example from start to finish, I want to show how measurement gets layered on here and how we can look at valuable metrics that a value stream can provide. So a typical very high level abstract value stream for software development. We've got measurement laid on top of that. And we're typically looking for a CI/CD pipeline that's just code and deploy. So we're missing a little bit of information about what happens before and what happens afterwards. But by looking at a value stream, we can see lead time, which is incredibly valuable. So how long does it actually take us to deliver value to our customers from start to finish? And we can also look at deployment frequency, which we might be getting already from CI/CD, but maybe not, depending on the maturity of that solution. We can also look at mean time to recover. So how long is it going to take us to fix something that's happened in the system? So we're probably already in production, or maybe we're already in staging, and we need to change something, or we need to issue a security fix. So how long does that take? Because it's incredibly valuable to measure our responsiveness to issues and change. And then we're also looking at change fail percentage. So how often do our deployed changes fail in production or in staging or whatever environment we're looking at? And these 4 metrics, people might recognize them as DOOR metrics. They were defined after years of study by looking at different teams and looking at different environments. And they're extremely valuable for both startups and enterprises. So if you're looking at how to measure software delivery performance, I recommend digging into them. I'll share some links afterwards if you're interested, if you haven't heard of them before, but they map very well to a value stream, and it's very valuable to think of collecting these metrics in terms of a value stream. And as you progress, you can start to collect these automatically, but a value stream map is a very easy way to get all of these metrics in a couple of hours. So if you've never measured any of these, and to set up tooling and automation to measure them would be, you're looking at days or weeks to set that up, sometimes months to set that up, because you don't have control over it. By doing a value stream map exercise, you can collect all this data, and all of a sudden you're measuring the most widely valued metrics in the software development industry. So I'll pause again for a moment before I shift gears again.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this ties into the comment that Andre made, right? That it's important to measure and start capturing the right things. If you're just measuring, number of times you went to production or how many times you went live, that's not necessarily adding a lot of value. But you start capturing these things, eventually you'll get the ammunition you need to capture some of the valuable metrics, as we call them, and that can actually be your map or your compass, depending on where you are, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for tying it back to maps and compasses. Well done. So to kind of wrap this up, and we're almost done, but I want to kind of pull all these ideas together for you in a Venn diagram. The way I see value stream mapping is this combination of visibility, measurement, and improvement. So visibility is something that I find extremely valuable. No surprise that I named my company Visible, but it's really important in these days of collaboration and knowledge work, and especially as we are distributed now, and we're working across different environments and with different capabilities to be able to see what's going on. It's incredibly valuable. And oftentimes without seeing what's going on, we can't act, and we can't act with confidence. So being able to see and share that information so that everyone is on the same page really drives that alignment that we're always looking for between different groups of people, because inside of a value stream, we have multiple stakeholders represented. We have developers, we have designers, we have product people, we have sales and marketing. And depending on where we're setting the goalposts and where we're focusing our view, we could be bringing all those people under the same view. And I find that incredibly powerful. And the measurement really allows us to improve by giving us a clear view of where we're starting from, what is our baseline, and then how are we making progress. You can take these periodic measurements. I often will take a digitized value stream and put it into a spreadsheet so that you can track as you iterate every time you're changing measurements, and you can see progression over time. So you can start to see, okay, well, we're making headway, we're making real progress, and what we're doing is paying off, which helps build confidence from leadership. It helps build the team's confidence. It helps build trust. And you know that what you're doing is paying off, and you know that you can shift gears or change strategy if it's not. And I find that incredibly valuable, and it's very confidence building. Just as a reference point, you know, I talk about value streams in software development a lot, but really this practice, you can use it for all kinds of things. So anything inside of an organization, I just see organizations as collections of value streams. So your new hire onboarding is an incredibly valuable and powerful value stream that a lot of companies don't focus attention on. They don't look at what's involved in getting somebody up and running and making them feel included and valuable and empowered. And so that's a very powerful value stream to focus energy on. Product development, incident response is another incredibly important value stream, and they're just everywhere. So as you start to look at things in terms of value streams and how you can analyze them and how you can measure and improve them, this is a skill that you can reuse over and over and over again. And I really hope that it's something that we see more commonly in organizations. So you might notice that I haven't mentioned capability maps yet, and I'm gonna touch on it really quickly. It's a little more straightforward, I think, than value stream mapping, but I find it also very powerful in establishing a baseline for a team and having a team look at where are we right now and where should we be investing, but from a skills and capabilities perspective. So if we look at a team and we say, okay, well, in order for us to optimize this value stream and improve and automate all these pieces that we've identified, what are the capabilities that we're going to require to do that? Because there's no sense saying that, you know, we need to automate our software deployment without having the capability to do it, right? That's just going to be very frustrating, and our odds of success are going to be very low. So by highlighting the level of competency and capability inside the team, now we can start to focus energy on. So maybe we need training, maybe we need to bring in a consultant, maybe we need to pair somebody with somebody else, and maybe we're just missing coverage. You know, so we have one person who's doing it right now, but you know, they get sick or they have to go on vacation, or, you know, they could change jobs. And so looking at, okay, we not only have an owner for this, but we have a backup, and we have someone who's learning from them. We have someone to support them. And that's going to put us in a position where we can say to leadership, not only have we mapped the value stream and we know where we're going to get high ROI from our efforts, we're also capable of doing it. Or, you know, what we need from you is a hire with these capabilities, or we need to, you know, shuffle some people around so that we can have people focused in different areas or owning specific aspects. And I just think that this is kind of, you know, part of the recipe for success. Because if you're looking at improving a value stream without taking an assessment of your capabilities, then it's really a gamble, right? You're not really sure that you're going to be able to pull it off with any high degree of confidence. So is there any questions about this?
We have 15 minutes left. Steve?
All right, well,
Yeah.
That is pretty much my last slide. So I'm going to motor through, and then we can go to conversations.
Yes.
Sound good?
Some amazing conversation going on at chat box.
Great. Okay, well, let me wrap up. It'll take me 10 seconds. So to kind of bring all this together and leave you with a few points, where I see the most value with these practices is that they're incredibly relevant. You know, if we compare industry benchmarks, if we compare case studies from other organizations, assessment models, metrics that are industry best practices, they're not as relevant as looking at our situation, our current surroundings. So taking the maps and working from our current state, our real current state, is orders of magnitude more valuable. And it's going to make us feel like we are part of this transformation rather than we're trying to head to somebody else's idea of success. It's incredibly accessible because it's mostly a visual medium that we're talking about. It's clear, it's simplified. Anyone from the business side, the technical side, inside the company, outside the company, they can all understand this and they can all speak the same language. And I think that's incredibly powerful. We're not talking about overly technical documentation. We're not talking about documentation at all, which is often misunderstood and very easily misunderstood. It's really hard to disagree about a picture when you map data on top of it. Numbers really settle a lot of arguments, I find, in my experience. This whole exercise is very collaborative. This isn't one person's perspective. We're bringing together a bunch of different perspectives to build this. And so not only are we getting a variety, a diversity of perspectives, it's a team building exercise. We're now getting on the same page together. And in many, many cases, it's the first time that they've ever done an exercise like this. And I talk to a lot of teams where sometimes it's the first time that people have ever spoken to each other, from the sales and marketing team to the product team, which might seem amazing, but it happens a lot. And the final piece that, really is the most important is that this is actionable advice. You can draw a value stream and feel very confident that if you're spending time and energy in a specific area, you're going to get results. And what the top priority is, what's actually going to make a difference. And I would encourage you to start doing this. If you'd like any help with it, if you'd like to know more, I'm going to share slides. I'm going to share some resources. I've got a bunch of resources on my site, visible.is, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm Steve at visible.is, and I'm happy to talk about any of this further. So